Welcome to the latest update on the changing landscape of state laws in the United States. It's like the country's a collective teenager going through a phase, except instead of just changing their taste in music, they're changing the rules about what you can and can't do. And sometimes, those rules vary wildly depending on where you live. This year, we're diving into the states making significant changes in gun restrictions and marijuana legalization. We're talking about two issues that are so politically charged, they make the Hatfields and McCoys look like they're just having a friendly disagreement. Now you might be thinking, why should I care about what's happening in a state I don't even live in? Well, for starters, because what happens in one state rarely stays in one state. It's like a game of legislative dominoes, where one state's decision can influence others. Plus, you never know, you might find yourself on a road trip and suddenly need to know the local regulations on, well, you get the idea. So buckle up, because we're about to embark on a cross-country tour of new laws, and frankly, it's more exciting than any episode of House Hunters you've ever seen, in significantly less stage, probably. Let's start with the state that's often at the forefront of gun control legislation, California. California, a state known for its beaches, tech giants, and apparently a deep-seated fear of unregulated firearms. They've been enacting stricter gun laws for years, and 2025 is no different. This year, California is tackling the issue of ghost guns. No, not guns haunted by the ghosts of people shot in gun violence, although that would be a terrifyingly effective PSA. We're talking about guns assembled from parts, often bought online, making them untraceable. These ghost guns are a bit like the IKEA furniture of the firearm world, easy to assemble, potentially deadly, and frustratingly difficult to track. California, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that maybe, just maybe, making it harder for people to get their hands on these untraceable weapons is a good idea. And look, you might be thinking, but John, what about my Second Amendment rights? Well, first of all, I'm not your friend, and second, that's a whole other can of worms we don't have time to open right now. Just know that California is taking a stand, and as usual, the rest of the country is watching with a mixture of fascination and mild terror. Speaking of taking a stand, let's head east to New York, a state that's no stranger to gun violence itself. New York has decided to tackle the issue of concealed carry, because apparently walking around with a concealed weapon wasn't nerve-wracking enough already. They've implemented stricter requirements for concealed carry permits, because apparently just letting anyone carry a hidden firearm willy-nilly wasn't working out so well. It's like they looked at the statistics on accidental shootings and said, you know what? We can get those numbers even higher. Now, getting a concealed carry permit in New York is about as easy as finding a rent-controlled apartment in Manhattan. Theoretically possible, but practically impossible. You need to prove you have proper cause and undergo extensive training. It's enough to make you want to just stay home and watch reruns of Law & Order, which, let's be honest, is probably safer anyway. But seriously, New York's crackdown on concealed carry is a big deal. It's a direct response to the Supreme Court's decision last year that struck down a similar law, and it shows that the state is willing to fight tooth and nail, or at least legal brief and legislative maneuver, to keep its citizens safe. Our next stop on this legislative road trip takes us to the Midwest, to the great state of Illinois, where they're saying no to high-capacity magazines, because apparently the ability to fire hundreds of rounds without reloading wasn't quite excessive enough. Illinois has banned the sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. It's a bold move, especially considering the, shall we say, mixed track record of gun control in this country. But hey, at least someone's trying to do something about the fact that it's easier to buy an AR-15 than it is to buy a decent used car in this country. Of course, this being America, the law has been met with the usual chorus of opposition. Gun rights advocates are up in arms, claiming that the government is trying to take away their Second Amendment rights. Meanwhile, gun control advocates are cautiously optimistic, hoping that this is a sign that the tide is finally turning on gun violence in America. Only time will tell what the long-term effects of Illinois' ban will be. But one thing's for sure, it's a clear indication that the debate over gun control is far from over. In fact, it seems like it's just heating up. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about something a little less, shall we say, combative marijuana legalization. And where better to start than Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes and, as of this year, legal weed? That's right, folks. Minnesota has joined the growing list of states saying yes to recreational marijuana. It's like they looked at the tax revenue Colorado and California were raking in and thought, hey, we could use some new hockey rinks. Now, before you pack your bags and head to the North Star State for a little legal getaway, there are a few things you should know. First of all, you still can't just light up anywhere you want. Public consumption is still illegal, so you'll have to find a private residence or, a really understanding friend's basement. And second, the law is still pretty new, so there are bound to be some hiccups along the way. But hey, that's all part of the fun, right? I mean, what's the point of legalizing weed if you can't have a few good stories about the early days of legalization? Moving on to the Show Me State, where they're showing you that, yes, you can indeed buy weed now. That's right, Missouri has joined the ranks of states where you can walk into a dispensary and buy marijuana without a doctor's note. Now, Missouri's legalization story is a bit of a roller coaster. They voted on it back in November, and let's just say the results were about as close as a nail-biter election night. But in the end, the people of Missouri spoke, and what they said was, we want to get baked without breaking the law. Of course, as with any major policy change, there are those who are thrilled and those who are, shall we say, less than thrilled. Some folks are worried about the impact on public health and safety, while others are just annoyed that they can't walk down the street without getting a contact high. But hey, that's democracy for you. But one thing's for sure, Missouri's decision to legalize recreational marijuana is a sign of the times. The tide is turning on this issue, and it's only a matter of time before more states follow suit. Alright, so we've got states tightening the old gun laws and others embracing the sweet aroma of legal weed. Now let's talk about what happens on the ground, in the communities wrestling with these changes, because it's not always as simple as less crime or more Cheeto consumption. Take marijuana legalization, for example. Some towns roll out the green carpet, welcoming dispensaries with open arms and dollar signs in their eyes. Tax revenue, new jobs, tourists flocking in to sample the local produce. It can feel like winning the lottery, but with fewer questionable life choices afterward. But, and this is a big but, not all communities are created equal. Some, particularly smaller rural towns, might find themselves ill-equipped to handle the sudden influx of, shall we say, enthusiastic entrepreneurs. And let's not forget the potential downsides: increased public health costs, concerns about youth access, and the ever-present risk of Cheeto dust-related incidents skyrocketing. The point is, the impact of these new laws isn't a one-size-fits-all scenario. It's a mixed bag of potential benefits and challenges, and how it all shakes out depends on a whole host of factors. So buckle up, because we're diving into the nitty-gritty of how these changes are playing out in your backyard. Now let's shift gears and talk about the impact of stricter gun control. And much like the marijuana debate, it's not as black and white as some politicians, with their black and white campaign donations, might have you believe. On the one hand, supporters argue that stricter gun control leads to lower rates of gun violence. And look, I'm no statistician, but that seems to track. Fewer guns in circulation, fewer opportunities for those guns to be used in, shootings and whatnot. But on the other hand, opponents argue that these laws infringe on their Second Amendment rights, and that criminals will always find ways to get guns regardless of the law. Which, okay, fair point. Criminals aren't exactly known for their strict adherence to the rule of law. The reality, as always, is more nuanced. The impact of gun control on crime rates is a complex issue with a lot of variables at play. And it's important to look at the data, the studies, and the lived experiences of people in communities impacted by gun violence to get a full picture. Now, it wouldn't be America if we didn't have a good old-fashioned culture war brewing over these new laws. Now, would it? Because let's be honest, nothing brings people together like vehemently disagreeing about fundamental rights and freedoms. You've got your pro-gun control folks, often concentrated in urban areas, who see these laws as a necessary step to curb gun violence and make communities safer. They point to statistics, they share heartbreaking stories, they organize rallies, and they vote for politicians who promise to prioritize gun control. And then you've got your pro-Second Amendment folks, often concentrated in rural areas, who see these laws as a slippery slope towards government overreach and an infringement on their constitutional rights. They cling to their guns, they stockpile ammunition, they wear "come and take it" t-shirts unironically, and they vote for politicians who promise to protect their right to bear arms. And in the middle of all this, you have the communities themselves grappling with the real-world consequences of these laws. Some will see a decrease in gun violence, some will see an increase in black market activity, and some will see very little change at all. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's a stark reminder that we are a nation divided on some pretty fundamental issues. America's political divide rears its ugly head again with new laws. Red states push back on gun control, citing Second Amendment rights. Protests, legal challenges, and debates ensue. Meanwhile, Others celebrate potential safety for their kids. Marijuana legalization sparks mixed reactions too. Conservatives worry while others celebrate newfound freedom. The debate is far from over. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the whole red versus blue narrative, but the reality is, these issues are far more nuanced than that. Within each party, there are factions with differing viewpoints, and let's not forget about the independents, those brave souls who dare to venture outside the comfort of the two-party system. The passage of these new laws is just the beginning of what's sure to be a long and contentious road. We're talking about deeply held beliefs and values, and those don't change overnight no matter how many laws you pass. The challenge now is to find a way to have a productive conversation about these issues, one that moves beyond the usual partisan talking points. It's not going to be easy, and frankly, it's probably going to involve a lot of shouting and maybe even some tears. But if we can find a way to listen to each other, to understand where the other side is coming from, maybe, just maybe, we can start to bridge the divide and find some common ground. Okay, who am I kidding? This is America we're talking about. We're more likely to see a flying pig wearing a monocle than a civil discourse about guns or weed. But hey, a cynic can dream, can't they? The important thing is that we keep talking, keep pushing for change, and keep holding our elected officials accountable. All right, so we've covered the big ticket items, guns and weed, but while everyone was busy arguing about those, a whole bunch of other state laws quietly went into effect. And some of them, well, let's just say they're a bit more, how do I put this delicately, bananas. Take, for instance, the ongoing battle over transgender rights. Across the country, states are enacting wildly different laws, creating a confusing patchwork of rights and restrictions for transgender individuals. Some states are passing laws that make it easier for transgender people to update their legal documents to reflect their gender identity, which, seems pretty reasonable. But then you've got other states going in the complete opposite direction, enacting laws that restrict access to healthcare, sports participation, and even bathroom use for transgender individuals. It's almost as if some lawmakers woke up one day and decided, you know what we haven't messed with enough? People's right to exist authentically. Now, to be fair, it's not always a clear-cut case of good versus evil, although it often feels that way. Some states are trying to find a middle ground, enacting laws that attempt to balance the rights of transgender individuals with the concerns of others. For example, some states have passed laws that allow transgender students to use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity, while also providing accommodations for students who are uncomfortable with that. But even these attempts at compromise have been met with resistance from both sides. Advocates for transgender rights argue that any restrictions are discriminatory, while opponents argue that these laws infringe on the privacy and safety of others. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. Of course, these are just a few examples of the many laws that have been passed at the state level. From education to healthcare to environmental regulations, states are constantly experimenting with new policies and approaches. And while it's easy to get caught up in the headline-grabbing issues like guns and weed, it's important to remember that these other laws can have just as big of an impact on people's lives. So, the next time you're feeling overwhelmed by the constant barrage of news, take a moment to look beyond the headlines and see what else is happening in your state. You might be surprised by what you find. And who knows, you might even be inspired to get involved and make your voice heard. Because at the end of the day, these laws aren't just words on a piece of paper, they're the rules that shape our lives, and it's up to all of us to make sure they reflect our values. Well, there you have it, folks. A whirlwind tour of the ever-changing landscape of state laws, from gun control and marijuana legalization to transgender rights and everything in between. 2024 is shaping up to be a pivotal year for state legislatures. And as we've seen, these laws have the power to impact every aspect of our lives, from our personal freedoms to our economic well-being. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more updates on how state laws are evolving and what it means for you. And remember, staying informed is just the first step. Don't be afraid to get involved, make your voice heard, and hold your elected officials accountable. Because at the end of the day, these laws are supposed to work for us, not the other way around. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more insightful content.